When I talked about India's two-faced foreign policy, someone left a message saying that Singapore is also a two-faced country, playing a diplomatic balance between China and the United States, trying to please both sides and earning a lot of benefits. My reply was that a pro-China Singapore is just another Hong Kong for China, and China does not need it. On the contrary, the so-called two-faced Singapore now is in line with China's national interests. Both Lee Kuan Yew and Lee Hsien Loong did a lot of two-faced things during their time in power and were criticized by many Chinese netizens. However, Chinese society has a very high evaluation of Lee Kuan Yew and his son, even higher than most Chinese leaders. If Singapore is really as bad as these netizens say, can Lee Kuan Yew and his son have a positive image in China? First of all, we have to figure out whether Singapore is a country that implements an independent foreign policy or a two-faced country. If we assume that Singapore is completely pro-China, it means that Singapore will face strong global military pressure from the United States. Not to mention wanting to be a world financial center or a high-tech industry center. Even the most basic industry of a shipping center will be uprooted. Singapore's pro-China stance will lead to Southeast Asian countries' fear of the Chinese rising again. Countries with a large number of Chinese, such as Malaysia and Indonesia, will not hesitate to choose to turn to the United States to avoid being controlled by the Chinese. This is not only a disaster for Singapore, but also a huge price that is unbearable for the entire Southeast Asian Chinese. It is unfair for us to judge Singapore's foreign policy in the past based on the fact that China has developed. Today, the Chinese Navy has several aircraft carriers, large destroyers, frigates, and a large number of nuclear submarines, which can confront the United States in the South China Sea. But 20 years ago, the entire Chinese Navy was not enough to fight against a U.S. aircraft carrier battle group. If Singapore had always implemented a pro-China policy after its founding, it would have perished long ago. It is very rare that Singapore can maintain friendship with the United States and the West, deal with Southeast Asian countries, and provide advice for China's reform and opening up, help China's economy start by jointly building parks and direct investment. Those criticisms of Singapore, so-called Singapore's accusation that the Chinese government's policies hurt the feelings of the Chinese people, are purely persecution delusions. Our generation has many criticisms of the Chinese government and China's political ecology. Are we all traitors hidden in China? Even our own citizens are dissatisfied with the government, so why should the Singapore government be 100% consistent with the Chinese government? Not to mention Singapore, Hong Kong cannot completely obey the central government. Developed provinces such as Guangdong and Jiangsu also have many complaints about the central fiscal transfer payment system. Everything is for profit, don't always talk about emotions. Secondly, let's assume that Singapore completely leans towards the United States. I believe that everyone has seen the video of TikTok CEO Shou Zi-Chew being questioned by a U.S. senator. No matter how he explained, this stupid senator just thought Chew was Chinese and might even be a member of the Communist Party of China. Yes, in the hearts of many Westerners, they don't care whether you are from Hong Kong, Taiwan, or Singapore. You have a Chinese face and a Chinese surname, so you are Chinese. Chinese scientists in the United States are always the target of prevention. Even a successful entrepreneur like NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang cannot become a person trusted by the U.S. government like white people such as Bill Gates and Zuckerberg. When white and even Indian business tycoons attended Trump's inauguration, Jensen Huang chose to go to China to celebrate the Spring Festival with his employees and meet with suppliers and customers. A simple fact is that if China is strong, no country can use force against Singapore. And the Chinese in Southeast Asia will have enough confidence to fight for their legitimate rights and interests. If China is poor and backward, like in the 1970s, relying on Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Southeast Asian Chinese relatives for relief, Chinese people around the world will suffer all kinds of discrimination. We talk about the various ridicules and boycotts suffered by Indian immigrants in Western countries. In addition to their many bad habits, A very important reason is that India really has no national strength to speak of. The contempt and ridicule of India by the Western media is entirely caused by the Indians' love of bragging, but lack of practical ability. Such a social atmosphere not only makes the local Indians feel humiliated, but also overseas Indians are not immune. Therefore, Singapore will never be able to express support for the United States in the competition between China and the United States and hope that China will fall. If China is really finished, Singapore will be just an ordinary port for the United States and will not be qualified to be an important ally. Not to mention being equipped with top American weapons like the F-35, it would be difficult to visit it. In other words, Singapore did not adopt a two-faced foreign policy, but took a completely independent diplomatic route. It neither prioritized the national interests of the United States nor the national interests of China, but put the national interests of Singapore first. When the U.S. president asked the Singaporean government to exempt American citizens from caning, the Singaporean government resisted the pressure and only reduced the number of canings. When the confrontation between China and the United States intensified, a large number of countries supported the United States at the first time, and international public opinion was extremely unfavorable to China. The Singaporean government made it clear that it would not stand on the side of the United States to confront China. Singapore opposed trade sanctions and confrontation and firmly supported globalization. Compared with these, the various foreign policies of Singapore that Chinese netizens complained about, such as being pro-American and criticizing the Chinese government, are not worth mentioning at all. My feeling is that when China's national strength was weak, Singapore's neutrality and pro-American components were mostly. When China's national strength was strong, Singapore's neutrality and pro-China components were more. Such a precise balance is not mastered by all countries. This is also the fundamental reason why Lee Kuan Yew and his son were able to establish great prestige in Singapore and have a good reputation in China. I also mentioned an interesting thing. China's radical nationalists often denounce Singapore as a running dog of the United States. But they overlooked that Singapore bought a large number of NVIDIA GPUs, which are high-end AI chips that the US government strictly prohibits from being sold to China. And Chinese companies can always obtain them in large quantities. Hong Kong is undoubtedly one of the channels, but as a Chinese territory, the US's monitoring and control measures on Hong Kong are much higher than those of Singapore. If Singapore does not maintain the so-called two-faced style, can it obtain so many advanced Western chips? Do we really intend to rely on old chips to build computing centers and compete with the United States in the AI war before China's chip industry makes a breakthrough? China's chip manufacturing technology is rapidly advancing, and AI large models have also accumulated considerable technology. Sooner or later, we will completely get rid of our dependence on the United States. But when that day comes, we don't have to cross the river and demolish the bridge and forget Singapore's great contribution to China. Don't always stare at the little money Singapore makes by speculating in the financial market. Singaporeans also have to support their families. Between countries, everything is about interests. What we need to know is that Singapore is a very good rich relative. It helped China develop when China was poor and weak, and helped China circumvent sanctions after China became strong. It is reasonable to charge a fee for such high-risk behavior, so don't complain. We should not compare India with Singapore. The foreign policy of the Modi government is more about empty talk than pragmatism. It is very short-sighted, betraying Russia, making enemies with China, and trying to please the United States and Western countries. It even opposes things that are beneficial to India's national interests, such as de-dollarization and reducing dependence on the US dollar. Such a two-faced person is extremely stupid compared to Singapore. And it has been proved that India has lost the support of Russia and China and has been slapped in the face by the United States and Western countries one after another, becoming a global joke. Singapore, on the other hand, has maintained a perfect balance between China and Western countries. No matter how you criticize it, Singaporeans enjoy high incomes, and live in a garden city. Instead of being dissatisfied with Singapore, it is better to reflect on your own country and why it has not been able to seize opportunities like Singapore. At the end of the video, I asked those netizens who criticized Singapore, after Modi retires, will it achieve the same status as Lee Hsien Loong in the evaluation of world history? Or will we see Singapore gain a widely praised political leader and India gain a political clown?